In the 1920s, in the dusty plains of what is now Pakistan, a team of British and Indian archaeologists were searching for the edges of known history. They were following the trail of Alexander the Great, hoping to find small outposts, forgotten garrisons. They began to dig, and what they found at first seemed unremarkable. The ruins of an old settlement. But then, they noticed something strange. The bricks. They were not sun-dried mud, but high-quality, kiln-fired bricks, all of a uniform, standardized size. Thousands of them. Millions of them. This was not a simple village. This was the work of a major, organized society. As they dug deeper, the true scale of their discovery began to emerge. Not a military outpost, but a city. A massive, meticulously planned city, stretching for miles. And it was a city that no one knew existed. It had no name in the great histories of Herodotus. It was not mentioned in the Bible or in the epics of Mesopotamia. They had discovered a lost world, a great civilization, contemporary with Egypt and Sumeria, that history had completely and utterly forgotten. The modern metropolis. As the archaeologists cleared away the dust of 4 millennia, the true genius of this lost civilization was revealed, not in a great pyramid or a golden death mask, but in the very layout of the city itself. The streets of their largest city, Mohenjo-Daro, were laid out in a near-perfect grid system. Main streets running north to south, smaller lanes running east to west, a meticulously planned city, something the great capitals of Europe wouldn't achieve for another 2,000 years. The houses were not simple huts. They were solid, multi-story buildings made from those millions of standardized, high-quality fired bricks, often built around private central courtyards. But what was found inside these houses was even more remarkable. Almost every single house, from the largest mansions to the most modest dwellings, had its own private bathroom, a dedicated room with a toilet, and a bathing area with waterproofed floors. This is an almost unbelievable fact. At a time when kings and pharaohs in other parts of the world lived in splendor, but their great cities were often filthy and chaotic, this civilization prioritized the health and comfort of its ordinary citizens. And these bathrooms were not just holes in the ground. They were connected, through chutes and pipes built into the walls, to a complex, sophisticated citywide network of underground sewer drains. A covered, subterranean sanitation system, the first of its kind in human history. Let me repeat that. 4,500 years ago, this civilization had mastered urban sanitation on a scale that cities like London and Paris wouldn't see again until the late 19th century. They had a system for managing public health that was millennia ahead of its time. This wasn't a primitive settlement. This was a blueprint for a modern city. They were masters of engineering, pioneers of public health, a society seemingly built on logic, order, and equality. So why has almost no one heard of them? And in a city so logical, so well-ordered, who was in charge? A civilization without kings. A city of this complexity, this order, requires leadership. It requires central planning, a government, a ruler. So the early archaeologists began their search for the king, for the grand palace, for the great treasure-filled tomb that would tell them the story of the empire's rulers. And they found nothing. Absolutely nothing. Think of ancient Egypt. It's impossible to imagine Egypt without the colossal statues of the pharaohs, their names and faces carved into every temple. Think of Mesopotamia, the sprawling palaces of Sargon and Hammurabi, the victory monuments celebrating their bloody conquests. The rulers of these civilizations wanted you to know, without a doubt, who they were. They shouted their power from the rooftops. The Indus Valley Civilization whispers. There are no grand palaces. There are large, well-built public structures, like the mysterious Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro, but nothing that screams, "This is the home of a god-king." There are no definitive royal tombs, no treasure-filled pyramids like in Egypt. Their graves are strikingly modest, with very little to distinguish the powerful from the common people. And most strangely of all, there are almost no depictions of warfare, no great stone reliefs of kings smiting their enemies. For a civilization that spanned an area larger than ancient Egypt and lasted for 700 years, it is eerily peaceful. There is only one major clue: a single small and beautiful soapstone statuette found in the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro. It has been named the Priest King. He is dignified, serene. A fillet is tied around his forehead. A cloak with a trefoil pattern is draped over his shoulder. His eyes are half closed, as if in meditation. But he is tiny, just 7 inches tall. He is not a colossal monument to be feared. He is an intimate portrait, and we have absolutely no idea who he is, or if he was even a ruler at all. So what kind of civilization was this? A peaceful republic of merchants, governed by a council of priests? Or an empire so stable, so spiritually unified, that its rulers had no need for grand monuments to prove their power? They built no great statues of themselves. They wrote no great histories of their conquests. Their leaders are silent. To have any hope of finding their voice, we must look to the one place they did leave their mark. On thousands of tiny, beautiful, and completely unreadable stone seals. The Unreadable Code. Across the thousands of square miles of the Indus Valley Civilization, archaeologists have found thousands of them. Small, square seals, intricately carved from soapstone. They are miniature masterpieces of art. Each one typically features a beautifully rendered, powerful image of an animal. Great humped bulls, rhinoceroses, elephants, and, most famously, a strange, elegant, unicorn-like creature.
Animal that does not seem to exist in the real world.
And above each animal is the code, a short line of elegant, abstract symbols, the Indus Valley script. It is a language of fish, of wheels, of stick-figure humans, and strange, geometric shapes. It is, without a doubt, a complete and complex writing system, as sophisticated in its own way as Egyptian hieroglyphs or Mesopotamian cuneiform. And it is the last great, undeciphered script of the ancient world. But why? Puzzled, why, in an age of supercomputers and artificial intelligence, can we still not read what they wrote? The first problem is that we have no Rosetta Stone, no bilingual text, no great inscription that translates the Indus script into a language we already know. The second and bigger problem is that all of our examples are incredibly short. The average inscription is only about 5 symbols long. The longest we have ever found is just a few dozen. Imagine trying to learn the entire English language, its grammar, its vocabulary, and its meaning, but your only examples are modern company logos. That is the immense challenge facing the codebreakers of the Indus script. So what do these short, cryptic messages say? Are they the names of the merchants who owned these seals? Are they religious invocations to the animal gods depicted below them? Are they titles, or place names, or something else entirely that we can't even guess? These tiny, beautiful seals are the only voice the Indus people have left behind. But it is a voice, speaking a language we cannot understand. Their cities are silent, their kings are silent, and now their writing is silent, which makes the final chapter of their story, their sudden, quiet disappearance from the world stage, the most profound mystery of all. The silent collapse. For 700 years, this great civilization thrived, a vast, stable, and seemingly peaceful empire of merchants and engineers. And then, between 1900 and 1800 BC, it began to die. When the first great excavators, men like Sir Mortimer Wheeler, dug down to the final layers of cities like Mohenjo-daro, they expected to find a story written in fire and blood. They looked for the telltale signs of a violent end that had consumed so many other ancient empires. Thick layers of ash from a great city-destroying fire. The shattered walls of a final, desperate siege. Mass graves filled with the skeletons of soldiers and citizens dead from a great battle. This is how most great civilizations die, in a storm of violence. But in the ruins of the Indus Valley, they found something far stranger, something far more unsettling. They found almost nothing. There are no widespread burn layers to suggest a massive, coordinated invasion. There are no great weapon caches. While a few skeletons found in the street show signs of a violent end, there are no mass graves to suggest a great war. The cities were not sacked. Their treasures were not looted. They were not burned to the ground. The archaeological evidence points to a different story. A quieter, stranger, and more profound ending. It seems that over the course of several generations, the people of the Indus Valley simply left. The great city slowly emptied. The meticulous urban planning and the great sanitation systems fell into disrepair. The trade networks that were the lifeblood of their economy fell silent. An entire civilization of up to 5 million people at its peak just faded away. This is the final and the greatest mystery of the Indus Valley Civilization. It is not a question of who destroyed them. It is a question of what. What force, what event, what slow catastrophe could possibly make millions of people abandon their perfectly built cities, the work of centuries, and simply walk away into the unknown? To answer that, investigators have had to look for a different kind of killer. Not an army with swords and shields, but a silent and invisible force. The suspects. If there was no great war, no single, violent event, what could kill a civilization so completely? Modern investigators have identified 3 prime suspects in this 4,000-year-old cold case. 3 silent killers. Suspect number 1 is the climate. The Indus Valley Civilization was the gift of a great river system. But what the rivers give, the rivers can also take away. Geological evidence from ancient lake beds and soil samples suggests that around 1900 BC, a major climate shift occurred. The powerful summer monsoons, which had watered their fields for centuries, began to weaken and move east. The great Ghaggar-Hakra River, which was once a massive waterway supporting hundreds of cities, began to dry up, eventually becoming the desert it is today. The mighty Indus River itself may have unpredictably shifted its course. Without a reliable source of water, their vast agricultural heartland slowly turned to dust. Suspect number 2 is economic collapse. The Indus people were, above all, traders. Their wealth depended on a vast international network that connected them to Mesopotamia and the Persian Gulf. But around the same time as the climate was changing, their trading partners in Mesopotamia were undergoing their own political turmoil and collapse. The old, stable trade routes became unstable. The international demand for luxury goods may have simply dried up. Without the lifeblood of international trade, the economic engine of the Indus civilization may have just seized up. The great cities, with no more goods to trade, slowly lost their purpose and began to empty. The final suspect is an invisible killer, epidemic disease. Recent analysis of ancient DNA extracted from skeletal remains has found the presence of pathogens like tuberculosis and leprosy. In their dense, crowded cities, even with good sanitation, a new virulent disease could have spread with terrifying speed. A devastating plague, sweeping through a population already weakened by chronic food and water shortages, could have been the final, devastating blow that made the great cities unlivable. So who was the real killer? The climate? The economy? Or disease? The truth is that it was likely not one suspect, acting alone. It was a conspiracy. A perfect storm of catastrophes. A changing climate destroyed their farms, the collapsing trade destroyed their wealth, and epidemic disease may have shattered their population. But while the civilization itself died, what happened to the millions of people who once called it home? For that answer, we must turn to our final witness, the ghost in their... The ghost in the genes. For decades, the story of the Indus Valley people ended with the silent collapse of their great cities. We knew the civilization died, but the ultimate fate of the millions of people themselves remained a mystery. But now, a new field of science, archaeogenetics, is allowing us to hunt for their ghosts, not in the dust of their abandoned cities, but in the living DNA of today. By extracting and sequencing ancient DNA from the few precious skeletal remains found at sites like Harappa, scientists can create a genetic snapshot, a biological photograph of these 4,000-year-old people. They can then compare this ancient genetic blueprint to the DNA of modern populations across South Asia, and the results are profound. The analysis shows that the people of the Indus Valley were not wiped out by a single cataclysmic event. They did not vanish from the earth. Instead, as their great rivers dried up and their cities slowly emptied, it seems they migrated. They moved east towards the fertile Gangetic Plain, and they moved south, further down into the Indian subcontinent. And as they moved, they mixed with the local indigenous populations they encountered. The DNA of the Indus Valley people became one of the primary ancestral threads that would weave together the incredibly complex and diverse genetic tapestry of modern-day India and Pakistan. So the ghost, in a way, has been found. The civilization died, yes. The great cities were abandoned. The beautiful script was forgotten. But the people survived. Their bloodline continues. Their legacy is not written on stone or clay tablets, but in the very cells of over 1 billion people living today. A farmer in the Punjab, a tech worker in Bangalore, a shopkeeper in Lahore. They may all carry a small piece of this silent 4,000-year-old ghost within them. This is perhaps the strangest twist in the story of the silent civilization. Their end was not a full stop. It was a transformation. They lost their cities, but they gave their genes to a subcontinent. Which brings us to their final legacy. Not what they built or what they wrote, but what they represent. The silent legacy. So, What is the final legacy of the silent civilization? It is a legacy of profound contradictions. They were one of the three great cradles of civilization, yet they remain the most anonymous. They gave the world, perhaps, its first and greatest example of large-scale, egalitarian urban planning. A vision of orderly, hygienic cities that cared for their citizens. They built a seemingly peaceful society that endured for 700 years, apparently without the need for grand monuments to individual kings or the glorification of war. In an age of boastful god-kings and brutal empires, they were perhaps a quiet exception. But their story is also a chilling cautionary tale. A stark lesson in the fragility of memory. It proves that a civilization can build 1,000,000 houses, can trade with the entire known world, can support a population of millions, and still can vanish from the pages of history almost completely. Without a translatable language, without the stories of their kings and their heroes, without the record of their triumphs and their fears, they remain a ghost. A beautifully complex, but ultimately unknowable civilization. And so we are left where we began, with the mystery, with the silent priest-king, his gaze forever turned inward, with the empty, perfectly planned streets of Mohenjo-Daro, still holding their secrets, and above all, with the beautiful, unreadable code on the stone seals. Perhaps one day, a new discovery will be made, a new Rosetta Stone, and these symbols will finally speak again, telling us their real name, the names of their kings, the stories of their gods. But until that day, they remain the silent civilization, a powerful, haunting reminder that the greatest mystery of all